Genesis 11, beginning at verse 1. Now the whole earth used the same language and the same words. It came about as they journeyed east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to one another, Come, let us make bricks, burn them thoroughly. And they used brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. And they said, Come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven. Let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we will be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, Behold, they are one people, and they all have the same language. And this is what they began to do, and now nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and there and confuse their language, so that they will not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of the whole earth. From there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the whole earth. We're going to talk about the Tower of Babel somewhat. More importantly, the lessons that we glean from it. For some reason, we have a desire to build things. Men like to literally build things, whether it's fast cars or big houses or projects or whatever. And you women aren't too far off. You like to build things too, like recipes in the kitchen, or maybe it's a craft project, or it's a sewing project or a career, but we all like to build things. And most likely when we get to Babel, that would have been one of the most monumental projects they had built at that time. It would have been something that would awe us had we been of that day. I hedged on you there a little bit because now we're used to looking at things like the Empire State Building, which is small compared to other structures now. And I have an idea that if we could really stand literally with our modern minds in front of the Tower of Babel, we'd be going, that's all it was? It wouldn't be real impressive to our modern skyscraper-oriented minds. But it was quite something that they had going on back then. And at a glance, it might have kind of sounded good. They were going to build a tower. They were going to reach into heaven. I'm certain they had some religious significance attached to all of that. And everybody thought it was a good project. And on the surface, it was. But under that surface, it was dark. It was really ugly. It wasn't pleasing to God because what they were doing was they were seeking God on their own terms. And of course, we don't get to do that. That's one of the issues we deal with as we deal with pride, is we think, I can do this on my own. I don't need God's help. And they left God out from the beginning. So we have some timeless truths here, and that's really what I want to focus on. I'm really not concerned with the historical details. I'll let you study that on your own. But what happens is when we build without God, it eventually leaves us feeling empty. Now, there's a little bit of trickery there on the devil's part, because up front, it can feel like, man, this is kind of fun. I think we're going somewhere. And you get into it, you get invested, and then it starts falling apart, because all Satan can build is a house of cards. And sooner or later, that house of cards is going to crumble. So ego and pride, they're going to come in there, and it's tempting. It's a neat little, I call it an unhealthy tree, because it is so tempting, because there is something in the heart of humanity, especially men, who want to leave their footprints on the earth. Which, when you think it through, is a pretty absurd idea, but nonetheless, it's something that just thrives in so many people. I'm going to leave a legacy behind that they'll talk about for generations to come. Now, the reality is, no, they won't. They won't be talking about it past maybe your grandkids, and then it's just like, it's over with. Now, to prove that point, tell me about your great-grandpa or your great-great-grandmother and the accomplishments they made. They were there. They did some stuff. They survived. You're here because they were there. But we get back to great and great, and then it's just absurd to think about great. But one of these days, that's where we're going to be. will be on the great, great, great list, and at best will be the name on somebody's family tree. And they'll go, oh, yeah, great, 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 great Uncle Clarence. I think he lived in Pine Bluff. And that's about as far as it'll go. That's the way it works. But pride and ego sneak in and think, oh, no, 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 no. I'm going to be different. No, no, we're not. One in a bazillion get to be different. So come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven, and let us make a name for ourselves. And I highlighted that part because that's where the problem came in. They bought into that temptation of pride and ego, and they were going to make a name for themselves. And incidentally, they are one of the exceptions that did it. And now I'm going to make a rough guess, 4,000 years later, maybe 5,000, we're still talking about them. But not in a good way, is it? This isn't the way we want to be remembered. You don't want to be remembered for the next 5,000 years as somebody who really blundered and caused humanity part of the mess that we're still trying to figure out. So in their failure, they really messed up. But there's the grace involved because God did not come down and annihilate them and just wipe them out completely. Now, there is punishment, there is judgment, but it was also redirection. It was an opportunity for them to move on beyond this faulty project, regroup in their own individual languages now at that time, and pursue God as they should have been doing from the beginning. So God is always kind of, he's on our side. It may not feel like it. And I'm pretty sure that when they were building, and however he came down and did what he did, I know all the little storybooks, when I was a kid and we'd read the story, there was always the Tower of Babel, and it was always round in a spiral. I don't know why, but that's the way it's always depicted. And of course, as I know you can't really see the little clip art I put up in the corner, but there's a lightning coming out of heaven and the tower is exploding. I don't know exactly how God did it, but I'm sure when he did it and brought what I'm calling the redirection of man's purpose, they didn't look at that and go, wow, this is such a wonderful blessing. Don't we serve a great God? They probably ran like scared dogs with their tail tucked between the legs and couldn't get out of that area quick enough, would be my guess. So we have our modern towers, and this is where we really need to focus. And it's easy to get caught up in our towers. Now, I put towers in parentheses there, or quotation marks, because it's not going to be a literal tower we're building. It's usually going to be an intangible tower of some sort. Now, it could be just a project, it could be a business, it could be literally a house. Some people are into having the biggest house in town and that kind of thing. You're just going to have to decide what is your possible potential Tower of Babel. Where would you get tripped up the most? And I'm just going to boil it down to personal agendas. That can really be our tower. Where's the heart of your passion? Where do you feel like, man, this is where I really come alive. This is what I was born to do. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. The trick is finding that passion and using it to God's glory instead of our own ego. And if you can make that distinction, then we're on pretty good ground. So things can look really good on the surface, and quite frequently they do look really good on the surface. But when you delve down into the motive, that's where we get into trouble. And really, I think one of the things the Tower of Babel does is it challenges us to look at our motives. Why am I doing what I am doing? Because what we do, as we'll see later, is we do everything to the glory of God. And so how am I glorifying God? Or Matthew 5:16, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. How is my light shining, and how is that light glorifying God, my Father in heaven? What's the real motive behind what we're doing? And it does get a little, I don't know, tricky, because one activity, take it, whatever you want it to be, can be good or bad, not because of the activity itself, but because of the motive involved. So there's nothing wrong with building a tower, is there? We have them all over the place, right? And we call them skyscrapers nowadays, but there's nothing wrong with towers. What makes it right or wrong is the motive building it? What were we really trying to achieve? And that's where we have to be brutally honest with ourselves. Now, if you are brutally honest with yourself, and again, this is always a very private thing, unless you have that really, really close friend that you can open up to, which is a great thing to have and is biblical, incidentally, James 5:16. But if you find yourself out of step, it's okay. It's not too late. Now, it's not okay if you go, I'm out of step, I'm going to stay out of step. I don't plan on getting back in step. Now we got a problem. I'll let you deal with that with the Lord in Judgment Day. But when you find yourself, you go, no, I just don't think this direction is quite right. That is a great blessing. That is that moment of redirection. That is where you go, okay, I need to come back over here. I need to do X, Y, Z, or whatever. And I need to get back in step with walking with the Father, whatever that happens to mean in your life where you're at. So we have the dangers of a misplaced focus. Babylon, it's just not just an ancient story. These people had the wrong intentions. They had the wrong direction. They had everything. And their accomplishment, I'm pretty sure it left you feeling pretty empty. And most of us know that experience. We've had something and we thought we're going to do X, Y, or Z, and we get it done. And you get to have the little celebration at the end. And then it's kind of like, oh, okay. Now what? Because earthly accomplishments just never satisfy in a lasting way. Solomon was saying in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, the eye's not satisfied with seeing, the ear's not filled with hearing, and you just never get enough. I always find it interesting as I listen to people who would be considered famous or very successful being interviewed. And I'm going to quote Jim Carrey because he says, I wish everybody could be rich and successful just one time so they would understand it's not what they think it is. And he's not the only person at that level to have said that. So one author, it was Lewis Howes, he made the New York Times bestseller list, and he said, he'd worked years and years on this project and the book and everything. And he said, we had the party, the celebration, which is all fine. We're not saying that's wrong. And he says, and after the party was over, I went home and went, so that's it. Now it's on to the next project. And that's where we're always going to feel kind of empty with our earthly accomplishments, even though I'm not saying it is wrong. It wasn't wrong for Lewis Howes to write a book. It was just that he had an expectation that when he hit the New York Times bestseller list, something, big question mark, was going to happen. And it didn't. He sold some books, he had some money, and then he said, now what? There wasn't that deep inner satisfaction that he thought. And that's what we're talking about. Satan's promises always leave us empty. The only place you're going to find that deepest, lasting satisfaction is in your relationship with God. And of course, that's infinite, so that's a little harder to explain. Nebuchadnezzar, he was at the top of the mountain of his day. Nebuchadnezzar was bragging. Is this not Babylon the Great, which I have built as a royal residence by the might of my power and for the glory of my majesty? I should have highlighted glory of my majesty. So his idea, and remember, this got him in trouble. Daniel had warned him. And then he came to this point, and God said, okay, you're going to live outside like a wild animal. We think maybe it was 7 years. It's a little cryptic. It says 7 times. But you're going to live outside for a while till you come to your senses. But he had thought, I'm going to build this Babylon the Great. And I kind of envision somebody who's kind of got their thumbs up in their vest, and their chest is puffed out like, look at me, look at what I did. And God says, let me show you what you did. You just got yourself 7 years or whatever living as a wild animal. And after it was all over, he realized his accomplishments did not have the depth that he thought they would have. Acts 20:35, really tough verse to incorporate. It is more blessed to give than receive. And when you find that, and when you click with that, then you start finding that deeper satisfaction when it becomes something that flows out of one's own heart. Now, there's a little bit of trick here too, though. It's all kind of tough. This is a straight and narrow way. This is a tough path to follow. And so there is so much emphasis upon the consumer, and that means selfishness. That means the emphasis is me, 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 me. And what Jesus is saying, no, that's not going to work. We need to flip that around. And that's hard to let go of. So it's the old analogy or the story of the way they capture monkeys down in some country somewhere. Is they take a big old gourd, we would say pumpkin, cut a hole in it, and clean it out, of course, and put nuts in it. And when the monkey sticks his hand in to grab the nuts, he makes a fist, but the hole's not big enough to pull his fist out of. And so he can't run fast dragging the pumpkin, and the hunters just run up and catch him. But all the monkey ever had to do was what? Let go of the treat. And he'd been free. But we get caught in that. We do. No. I'm going to be different. I know that out of 6,000 years of civilization, 106 billion people, nobody's ever done it before. But watch me. I got this. So we got to keep our focus. Let's do 3 verses really quick. Don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Don't be building a tower here on earth. Look, be a good person, love other people, take care of your responsibilities. But don't be putting a monument here on earth. I love the pyramids because the pyramids, we really don't know. You know, and when, the more they study them, the more they find out they don't know. So the old story that you were told if you were educated back in the time I was is Pharaoh so-and-so and so-and-so. And now they're going, no, we don't know. Look, somebody built those pyramids. Man, you want to talk about a tower that have lasted millennia, and we don't even know who built them. What I'm trying to say is you go ahead and build your tower here on earth. And you go ahead and build one that'll last longer than the pyramids. Here's what's going to happen. People are going to go, I don't know who built it. And they're going to completely forget. That's the emptiness. That's what happens when you lay up treasures on earth. So we commit our works to the Lord and our plans will be established. This is where the people of Tower of Babel messed up. They did not commit their works to the Lord. They did not start with God. They didn't consult with him. As we read the text, you find out God goes, hey, I need to go down here and see what's going on. Why? Because he wasn't included from the beginning. So whatever you do all to the glory of God. Now this is 1 Corinthians 10:31. I've been hitting this theme quite a bit, and I'll probably keep hitting it for another 6 months or longer. I've been using Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do it heartily as unto the Lord. Well, here's just a variation. Do all to the glory of God. And so the primary, the heart, the seed of success is being able to take whatever you do it to the glory of God. Now, obviously, if you're sinning, you can't do it to the glory of God. But beyond sin, then figure out, okay, how can I do this to the glory of God? How can I really glorify God in what I'm doing? When you connect that, now you're doing something. I'd like to ramble off on that a little further, but let's not. Unity now is a really wonderful force to have. The people at the Tower of Babel, they had great unity, but they had focused their unity in the wrong direction. They went for the bad. We want to take our unity and we want to focus it in the power of good. So we want to keep his commandments. That's what we want to do. We come together as a church family, as a local congregation, and that's what we want to do. We want to encourage one another to stir up love and good works. I think I've got that verse up here in a minute. And that's our unity. That helps us hold together in a cohesive group that moves along. But if all we have is unity and it's not focused in the right place on fearing God and keep his commandments, then it could get us in a whole lot of trouble. So here's our Hebrews 10:24. Let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another. And unity, it's not just assembling in the same building. That's part of it. But it's hearts that meld together. So let me use the marriage example really quick. So there are husbands and wives who have lived together. They even get their 50th wedding anniversary, maybe their 55th or whatever, depending on how long they lived, And they got years and years and years of sharing the same house. But just because they got that plate with the gold 50 on it, which I always joke and say, I want, and when I get mine, it'll be hanging in my office. Even though they got that, does not prove that the two became one as God intended. Because we all know there are people out there who just said, it's just easier to keep her than to divorce her. Or it's easier to keep him than divorce him. Because divorce is expensive, it's painful, and it's never pleasant. Even when it's justified, it's not pleasant. And so there are a lot of people who just have a business arrangement, not a marriage. Church can be the same way. And let's be honest about it. We call them our CE members. They just show up. They don't care about the local church family. Their heart's not here at Highway 79 South, Church of Christ. This is my people. This is where I invest my time. This is just where I show up to pay my fire insurance so I don't go to hell. I'm polite to everybody, and I'm out of here. They're not really unified. And it eventually comes to the surface. We get unified to keep God's commandments and to stir one another up along that line. And that's where the people of Tower of Babel failed. Somebody should have stopped and said, hey, whoa, wait a minute. Shouldn't we check with God first? But nobody spoke up. The consequences of excluding God, so you can have some really good plans, and those plans just fall apart. And things are always happening. There's more to control than you can control. So Jeremiah would say that the way of man is not in himself. There's just stuff we can't understand. We're finite. And you got to learn getting comfortable with finite, which is kind of an uncomfortable place, isn't it? We're limited beings by God's design. And since we're limited by God's design, he put in another element called faith. So trust me, I know what's going on. And that's hard to go, yeah. Now, we can say it easy, can't we? This little 3 pounds of gray matter doesn't work as fast as it used to, and that's A-okay. I don't know everything, but letting go and trusting God who does know everything, which is the wisest course of action when you put it on a logical scale you could ever take, and yet letting go and letting God can be really, really scary. Learning to be finite, limited, like we were created to be, is kind of hard to accept, especially for people who get into that little unhealthy treat of pride and ego. So think about the tabernacle versus the Tower of Babel. God is not against us building things, not at all. The problem with Babel was they were building a name for who? Themselves. They got their pride and ego involved. Now we come along to the tabernacle, and God blesses the workers with some skill and some talent, and around the temple time, and they did some wonderful building. But do you notice the difference? The tabernacle and the temple started off with God. It was directed by God. It was overseen by God, so to speak, I'll say through his prophets and Moses, and he blessed it all the way through. Tower of Babel, before that, God wasn't included, God wasn't consulted, God was excluded, and it was all about man's ego. Two totally different things. I would also notice that when men built a tower, they said, we're going to build it to the heavens. When God built the tabernacle, it wasn't much more than a tent. Isn't that interesting? And even the temple by today's standards would not have been that phenomenal to the modern mind at all. It wasn't a super big structure. In fact, there were bigger structures. But anyway, God gave us our gifts to use. He wants you to use his gifts. It's not that God is saying, okay, y'all don't want to make the mistake of the Tower of Babel, so you just need to go sit on the corner, sit on the benches on the sidelines and stay out. No, you don't bury your gifts. What you do is you get in there and you use your gifts, but you use your gifts to the glory of God. And so he gives us Psalm 119, 105 to instruct us. Thy word is a light unto my lamp unto my feet, a light unto my path. That's what the word's for. He gave us our gifts. He gave us the gift of life. He says, now I want you to use it. Now here, is the instruction book on how I want you to use it. And then he gives us a warning, Matthew 7:21 through 23. He says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but who does the will of my Father. And so now there you have it. If you want to please God, you do the will of the Father. And then the next two verses, he tells us some people who decided they could do it on their own. Now, it doesn't say it exactly that way. By the time you get to verse 23, it's really clear when he says, depart, I know you not. Or some translators say, I never knew you. It's like, oh, they were building their own Tower of Babel and didn't realize it until it was too late. So you got to build. You got to build on the right foundation. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. So one question to ask yourself is, why would God want me to succeed here? How does my success in whatever I'm doing, you fill in your blank with whatever you got planned this week, how does my success here glorify God? Now, I think there's a whole lot more potential there than you may think of, and a lot broader scope of things than you may think of. And I'll do the Colossians 3:23 again. Whatever you do, do it heartily for the Lord. But you need to make that connection and connect those dots yourself. Don't fall for the stupid ideas out there. Love it. I know some people don't like the word stupid, but that's the way I learned to say it. If a million people believe in a stupid idea, it is still a stupid idea. Don't fall for it. Evolution. How about there's no gender? There you go for another one. Self-deception, constant danger. It is always there. It is always no, but I'm different. No, we're not. That's one of the big humps to get over. We all sinned. We all fall short of the glory of God. None of us have it in us to direct our own steps. Our own hearts are deceitfully wicked, Jeremiah 17:9. And so just constantly just keep that radar moving. Where am I deceiving myself? How am I lying to myself? How am I fooling myself? Because the flesh will do it. And what did Paul say? The flesh lust against the spirit, Galatians 5:17. So how do we wisely build? I got a 3-part recipe for you. Going to hit it real quick because I got one more slide to go. We're going to pray. We're going to pray for wisdom. That's James 1:5. And we're going to study. You could add 2 Timothy 2:15 there if you want an alternate verse, but you're going to study the Word because that's where God's communicating to us. And then we're going to get that fellowship because Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friends. Or we stir one another up to love and good works, Hebrews 10:24. And that's what we're looking for. That's where community really comes into play. And I've got to get my Proverbs in mind where he says, basically, I'm going to mess up my paraphrase a little bit. The guy who isolates himself rages against all wisdom. In other words, the guy who isolates himself is the guy who says, I don't need nobody to tell me how to live life. I got this figured out. That's what that proverb's talking about. And what God is telling us is, no, you don't. You need other people to rub up against you and help polish and hone you and shape you. You need people to stir you up to love and good works. But what that means is as we get in closer and closer, and as we get closer and closer, it also becomes a crucible of sorts. And that's not always comfortable. And so people start backing off. That's why periphery members like to sit on the periphery and kind of stay out of sight so they can maintain their level of comfort but feel like they're connected at the same time. Well, we may let you play that game because this is kind of a voluntary organization from our horizontal point of view. If we come to you and say things you don't like, you can leave. And what can we do to stop you from leaving? Absolutely nothing, right? That's the way it works. Not real pleasant, but that's the way it works. So we have a little bit of a limit on how hard we can push at one another. And some people, they don't even like a look, let alone a push. And so it's tough. You need that fellowship. You need it close, and you need it. I'm not just talking about potlucks and good times, which are fine. I'm talking about the tough times when somebody needs to have a talk with you. Hope for tomorrow. God is teaching us how to walk. That's part of what the story of Babel does. It wasn't just one lesson way back then. God is saying, look, I recorded this here for y'all to learn that if you build for your own ego and pride to build a name for yourself, it's not going to work. Now, the judgment may not come as dramatic as it did in the middle of a day, as it did for the Tower of Babel, but judgment is coming. We will all stand before the judgment seat of Christ, give an account of deeds done in the body, and that day will be just as violent and as wicked, as uncomfortable as however God came down out of heaven and messed up that project. That's going to be just as tough, or I would say even worse, because after you reach the judgment seat of Christ, the opportunities for redirection are gone. At least the people of the Tower of Babel could go, wow, we messed up. We really goofed up here. We need to reconsider. And the judgment seat, there's no time to reconsider. So I think God desires something greater for us. It's just letting go of that ego and getting on board with Him. And I think all the faithful will look back someday and go, oh man, I'm so glad I did it this way. I didn't always understand it, but I just kept moving forward in faith. I took Romans 8:28. We know that God calls us all things to work together for good for those who love God, those who are called according to a purpose. I know He had bigger something going on. My job was just to trust. My job wasn't to answer every possible question that could be asked, because I have a finite mind. My job was just to trust God, have faith in God. So somebody said, hold your plans loosely. I like that. Have your plans. You go ahead and have a 5-year plan, your 10-year plan, your 20-year plan. Have your plans, but hold them loosely, because you never know when life is going to step in and go, no, we're not going where you thought you were going. And you're going to have to regroup. If you're over-invested in that, then you feel devastated. If you can learn to do what one author says, if you can learn to be happy in a new way, I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying if you can learn to be happy in a new way, then you're way ahead of the game. But if you're that person who says, I can never be happy without, fill in your blank. Is it your mate? I could never be happy without my mate. Is it your job? I could never be happy without my job. I could never be happy without my kids. I could never be happy without whatever. Fill in the blank. You're in a bad place. I'm not saying learning to be happy in a new way is easy. I'm saying it is a path forward. Hold your plan loosely and always draw nearer to God. So, you want to look at the motives of the heart. Always check those motives. That's where the people of Babel messed up. Plans without God, they're going to fail. You want the Lord to build the house. Absolutely. Understand, God doesn't play strike one year out. Man, we've had 50, 60, 70, 80 years. If God played strike one year out, most of us have been out of the game at, 15, 14, 16, a long time ago. His plans are for our good. Absolutely. 100%. So I'll close with that slide. Do our plans truly honor God, or do they serve our ego? And that's just for each of us to assess within the privacy of our own hearts. We're getting ready to sing Jesus is Calling, and He is. Question is, He said, I knock. Are you willing to let Him in? If you are not, it's time to make a change. Whatever we can do to help you while we stand and sing.